Good morning, all. Today, I, Aditi Mittal, student of PGDM, on behalf of BIMTech, would like to welcome you all to the discussion on the topic Union Budget for 2021-22 and Atmanirbhar Bharat. The most awaited Union Budget was presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in the Parliament on 1st of February. The Union Budget has been structured on four main themes of ease of living, aspirational India, economic development for all, and caring society. 2020 was the year of pandemic, which created unprecedented economic burden on the global economy. The government has to incur huge expenditure due to which the fiscal deficit of the country has increased. In fact, the government has projected the fiscal deficit for the year 2020 at 9.5% of the GDP as against the original target of 3.5%. The fiscal deficit target for the coming year has been pegged at 6.8% of the GDP, which suggests that the budget has been expansionary in nature. The budget has focused on long-term impacts rather than putting money directly in the hands of the consumers. There is a substantial increase of 137% in the budget outlay for health and well-being for the upcoming year. Apart from this, government aims at disinvesting some major PSUs. A lot of focus has been given on making India self-reliant. Production-linked incentive schemes to create manufacturing global champions for an Atmanirbhar Bharat has been announced for 13 sectors. The budget had both positives and negatives. So, to deliberate more on this, today we have with us Mr. Jayant Sinha, Chairperson of the Standing Committee for Finance, Parliament of India, and BJP Lok Sabha Member of Parliament from Hazaribagh, Jharkhand. I welcome you, sir, and I would like to call Dr. Shettigar, sir, to welcome our guest speaker.
Uh, Speaker of the day, Sri Jain Sinha, my faculty colleagues, I see some of the names here, Professor Akbar, Pooja Mishra, Monica Jain, Kaninda, and some of the colleagues will join later. And students, and of course, Eco Chambers Coordinator Aditi Mittal. So we have been conducting discussion on the budget every year. And this year's budget, of course, has got a special significance because of the prevailing economic situation. In fact, it is an extraordinary economic situation with the economy is under the recessionary trend, mainly because of the pandemic, resulting in expansion of the fiscal deficit are three times than what was budgeted when the budget was presented last year. So naturally, the students are keen to know what are its implications on the business environment in particular and the macroeconomic situation in general, especially from the point of view of the pressure the government had when finalizing the budget, especially in terms of resolving the dilemma between the deteriorating the fiscal balance and promoting the growth and the price we have to pay for choosing in terms of the growth. And is there any cushion to minimize that pressure in terms of the likely rise in the borrowing, resulting in interest pressure going up? And what is the roadmap for Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is a theme of the Prime Minister? So these are some of the issues. Of course, in addition to the rural crisis and not favorable international market. So what are the strategy the government has adopted? And to know this, and we are fortunate to have Sri Jain Sinha. I am sure that he is much qualified to analyze the budget because of his impressive academic background and also the professional background. Apart from his exposure within the government, currently he is the chairperson of Standing Committee on Finance. The earlier, between 2014 and 19, he was in the ministry, and more specifically, he was MOS in the Ministry of Finance and later Ministry of Civil Aviation. And before handing over to Aditi, let me also remind some of the students, because your seniors 10 years back, exactly 10 years back, the budget for 2011-12 was analyzed by the former Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha. And today we have his son here. Extend a warm welcome on behalf of the director, who will be joining maybe after half an hour, because there is another program is going on, literary festival. He will be joining later. So on behalf of the director, Dr. Chaturvedi, I would like to extend warm welcome. I'm sure the student and also the faculty colleagues, some more have joined, will get benefited with the analysis. Of course, Dr. K.C. Arora, our registrar, has also joined. With that, now I would like to hand over to Aditi.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay. Mr. Sinha, to talk more about Mr. Sinha is a second-term member of Parliament from Jharkhand. He won his Lok Sabha elections in 2014 and 2019 with record margins. As chairperson of the Standing Committee for Finance, Mr. Sinha leads the 31-member parliamentary panel that has oversight of the Ministries of Finance, Corporate Affairs, Statistics and Program Implementation, and the Niti Aayog. In addition, the panel has parliamentary responsibility for the Reserve Bank of India, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board, and the Insurance and Pension Regulatory Authorities. As a global thought leader, Mr. Sinha is a widely published author with articles in the Financial Times, Times of India, Economic Times, Indian Express, Business Standard, Harvard Business Review, and the McKinsey Quarterly. He has pioneered new thinking on platform-based businesses, market regulation, innovation-driven entrepreneurship, and sustainable development. Mr. Sinha is sought after in the global and Indian media for his perspectives on these topics. He has an MBA with distinction from the Harvard Business School, an MS in Energy Management and Policy from the University of Pennsylvania, and a BTech with distinction from the IIT Delhi. He was awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award from IIT Delhi in 2015. We welcome you, sir, and would like you to share your valuable insights.
Thank you very much, Aditi. And first of all, let me thank Professor Shettigar for inviting me for this very interesting session, which we are about to take part in. And I want to, of course, recognize all the faculty members at the Institute, and particularly Srimati Pooja Mishra ji for her coordination efforts in setting up this event. And a very, very good morning to my young friends who are attending this session and are showing great interest, not just in the budget, but also what's happening in the economy. So a very good morning to all of you and my warmest regards. Friends, we are at a momentous time in our nation's history and certainly in our economic history. And what I would like to do this morning for you all is to spend perhaps 20 to 30 minutes giving you a little bit more information about the economy and the budget. And then I think what you might find most interesting is an open Q&A session. I think Srimati Mishra ji will coordinate that. So that you can ask me whatever is on your mind, whatever questions you might have, whatever doubts or apprehensions you have. I would be very pleased to answer all of your questions. So let's structure our interaction this morning in that fashion. And in the 20 or 30 minutes in which I will speak, I really want to direct my remarks to three areas. First, it's very important to understand the global and Indian context for this budget. So what is happening globally as far as the global economy and trade is concerned, what is happening in India? So let's try and understand that first, because that's a context for this budget. Then second, and this is where I will spend the bulk of my opening remarks, what are the notable aspects of this budget? What are the 5 or 6 things that are truly profound, that are truly historic, and that people will remember this budget for? So let's really focus in on that. And then in the third part, which maybe we can continue through our Q&A as well, let me then highlight what are the few things that we should all be focusing on in terms of execution, in terms of delivering what this budget is aiming to do. So that's how I intend to structure my remarks. First, what is the global and Indian economic context? Second, what are the most notable features of the budget? And third, as far as execution is concerned, what are the things that we should all be supporting and helping the government on? So those are the 3 areas that I'll direct my remarks to. Let me start, first of all, with the global and Indian economic context. We need to understand that we are dealing with a situation that has happened after a century. We are dealing with a situation right now in this fiscal year and the last calendar year, that's the calendar year 2020, the fiscal year FY21, which is absolutely unprecedented. The last time we saw something like this was during the time of the Spanish flu post-World War I in 1918 and 19. So we're dealing with a once-in-a-century crisis in the global economy and India's economy right now. And in this context, it was very, very necessary to have a budget that would be a booster rocket for the economy, a booster rocket for this economy. And that's what this budget has delivered on. And really, it's clear to everyone that we were going to have a very strong recovery, whether it's the IMF, whether it's the Economic Survey, whether it's the RBI. Everybody expects growth in fiscal 22 or calendar year 21 to be in the 10 to 11% range. There is widespread consensus that that's going to happen. But in this global and Indian economic context, it was very important for the budget to take this unprecedented time, take this crisis and convert it into an opportunity to turbocharge our growth so that not only do we grow 10 to 11% in this fiscal year, but in the subsequent fiscal years, FY23, FY24, FY25, that we will come back to a fast growth trajectory of 7 or 8%. And remarkably, this budget has accomplished that. So we can now, with a high degree of confidence, believe that not only are we going to grow 10 or 11% this year, but thereafter we are going to be on a growth trajectory, which is going to be 7 or 8% real GDP growth. And that's what this budget has accomplished. It's a booster rocket for the economy. Now, why was it so important to have this booster rocket? Why was it so important to have a budget that really pushed the accelerator on growth? Well, as I said, we are facing a once-in-a-century crisis. The IMF projects that calendar year 20, global economic growth will decline by 3.5%. Now, I think since the IMF has been keeping records, and IMF, of course, is a post-World War II institution, a Bretton Woods institution, this is the first time that global growth is going to come down to minus 3.5%. Typically, the global economy grows at about 3 to 4%. So minus 3.5% is well off the growth trajectory for the global economy. And everybody is projecting that India's growth in this fiscal year is going to decline by between 7 to 8%. 7 to 8%, which is extraordinary. In India's independent history, we've only had before this 3 years where growth has not happened, where we've had a decline in GDP, a contraction in GDP. And the worst such incident, I think, if I remember right, was 73, 74, which of course now is more than 40 years ago, more 45 years ago. And during that time, the economy contracted by 5.4%, largely because of the oil crisis and deficient rains during the monsoon. So we had a contraction of 5%. This year, friends, we're going to have a contraction of 8%, somewhere between 7 to 8%. So not only is the global economy contracting by 3.5%, the Indian economy is going to contract by 7 or 8%. That has never happened in India's independent history. And as I said, you have to go back to the period of 1918, 1919 to find a historical parallel for this kind of contraction. Now, just so we understand what the Spanish flu was like, during the Spanish flu, India's population declined by 6%. In that period of 1819, 1919, and so on, the Spanish flu resulted in a population decline in India of 6%. And that decade, that between the 1911 census and the 1921 census, is the only time in recorded history. And of course, population records have been maintained now for more than 160 and 70 years. That is the only time in recorded history where India's population in a decadal period, 11 to 21, actually declined. That's how devastating that period was as far as India's history is concerned. And obviously, with that kind of population decline, the after effects of World War I, the Spanish flu raging through the population, we had a situation where the economy contracted. Now, how much did the economy contract? Nobody can tell. Maybe it was 7, 8, 10, 15%. We don't have good numbers on that. But that was the only time that we have seen a similar contraction, and that was on the population declining by 6% in a given year. So it was a really, really devastating period in India's history, and we have to go back a century to be able to see something similar. So we are dealing with a crisis, not just of a garden variety crisis or a crisis we've seen, every 10 or 15 years. For example, after the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9, we are seeing not a crisis that comes once in a decade, friends. We are seeing a crisis that comes once in a century, once in 100 years. And I really hope in your lifetimes, I hope I will not have to experience such a crisis again. I hope you all don't have to experience such a crisis again. We do get crises. I mean, we know what happened with the Asian financial crisis. We know what happened in the dot-com bust. The Asian financial crisis was 89, 90. We had the global financial crisis of the dot-com boost of 2000, 2001, then the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So we do have slowdowns in the global economy every decade or so. But growth plummeting, absolute contraction happens only once in a century. That's what we were confronted. Now, during this time, the government, really took some very, very powerful and bold decisions. And around the world, of course, you know that central banks have really, really relaxed their interest rates. They brought interest rates down to zero and are going to keep it there at the zero limit for a long period of time. That's been announced by the US Fed, by the European Central Bank, by the Japanese Central Bank. So we are at the lower bound when it comes to monetary stimulus. There's quantitative easing. Not only are we going to keep interest rates in the short term at 0%, we're keeping the yield curve not too steep, but keeping that as flat as possible so that longer term interest rates through quantitative easing, both by the Fed, the European Bank, and then, of course, following that in India as well, that we keep the yield curve so that it's not too steep and we keep our longer-term rates, the 10-year rate, etc., fairly low as well. So the UST, the benchmark 10-year treasury in the US had gone down to 0.93%. It has just again started to go up again. It's at 1.14% right now. But you can borrow, at 1.14%. And this is about as low as the treasury, as it's called, has ever been. And that's the benchmark rate on which the entire global economy runs. And that's at historic lows. So there's unprecedented monetary stimulus right now globally to be able to get past this incredible contraction that people are experiencing. And at the same time, around the world, people have unleashed fiscal stimulus like we've never seen before. So the US has already spent $3 trillion. They're talking about another $1.9 trillion that they want to spend. Obviously, the US, Japan, Germany, everybody has gone in and said we're going to spend 10, 15, 20% of GDP to ensure that this contraction doesn't become a permanent contraction in economic activity. So we are seeing unprecedented fiscal and monetary stimulus around the world because we are facing a once-in-a-century crisis. I will remind you all that during World War II, because of what was required from an economic and military basis, as a result of the spending between World War II, fiscal deficits in the US and elsewhere had gone up to 20% of GDP. That's effectively what we are seeing right now. Again, 20% of GDP, fiscal deficits, spending around the world, which are, world war level type fiscal deficits. That's the global environment that we're dealing with, massive amount of stimulus. Now, how did India respond to this incredible economic contraction and this massive amount of stimulus that was being pumped into the global economy by particularly the advanced countries around the world? Well, first of all, it was obviously to make sure that we protected lives. So the first priority, as the Economic Survey says, Dr. Subramaniam, who's the chief economic advisor, has said, is that livelihoods can come back, but lives don't, right? And so the government made a very, very correct decision, an extraordinarily important decision, where they said, what we are going to do is to make sure through the lockdown, through the support that we are providing, through the Abhiyan package, that we will protect lives, we will protect people's health, we will make sure that people have enough food, people are looked after, and if need be, we will provide them the cash as well, so that they can get through this difficult period. So while the lockdown was happening, while we were dealing with the worst effects of the pandemic, we of course made sure that 80 crore people were getting virtually free food grains, and that of course is reflected in the budget. I will come to that in the budget. But people got free food grains from March till November. And this was given to 80 crore recipients. And then we put about 35,000 crores into Jan Dhan accounts directly through 3 installments of 500 rupees each, went directly into women's Jan Dhan accounts. And through the Kisan Samman Nidhi, 75,000 crores through 3 installments also as cash payments went out. Similarly, we had a very good harvest during the Kharif crop, thankfully, and that also ended up being 20,000 crores of cash going directly into farmers' accounts. And thereafter, we paid out through the Kisan Samman Nidhi in total 75,000 crores. So huge amount, and of course now we know in the budget how much that was. This was about, I think, about 1 lakh crores worth of free food grains coming through the Food Corporation of India, 1 lakh crores plus through the Kisan Samman Nidhi and through the Jan Dhan accounts, massive procurements in agriculture. And then the Narega payments, which were projected to be about 71,000 crores, went up to 1.1 lakh crores. So a tremendous amount of spending went in this last fiscal year, this current fiscal year that we're in, the FY21 fiscal year, to support lives and to ensure that people were able to get through this crisis as best as they could. So all of that was done, cash payments were made, and spending kept up and so on. Now, because of all of this, friends, because of the kind of support that the government provided, we are now going through a V-shaped recovery because we were able to protect lives, people had security in the future, they got credit for MSMEs, they got cash in their bank accounts, their Kharif crop was purchased, all of that was done. People had confidence in the future, and the moment people felt that we were past the pandemic, they came out onto the streets again, they started to spend, they started to lead their normal lives, and we are seeing the benefit of that V-shaped recovery that is happening right now. So the government, looking at what was being done around the world, chose, I think, a more prudent path, which was while, as the Honorable Finance Minister and the Chief Economic Advisor have said, that when people's foot was on the brake, they didn't try to press the accelerator, right? There was no point pressing the accelerator when people's foot was on the brake because of the pandemic. The moment the pandemic lifted, then the government started to spend, and we have seen spending go up dramatically. As I said, not just in terms of cash transfers and payments to farmers and so on, but also in terms of capital expenditure. I'll draw your attention to the fact that we had in fiscal 20, that is the past financial year, spent 3.35 lakh crores on capital expenditure. We had budgeted to spend 4.19 lakh crores in capital expenditure in this current fiscal year, that is FY21. We've actually spent 4.39 lakh crores. And this did not happen during the lockdown, friends, right? During the lockdown, everything was shut down for 6 months. Most of this has happened in the last few months. So the ramp up of government expenditure, capital expenditure in the last few months has been absolutely dramatic. When people's foot was off the brake, and then we could press the accelerator. So I'm giving you this picture of what has happened in the last 6 to 12 months so you understand the context for the budget. There was unprecedented global stimulus on the one hand, and on the other hand, the government had gotten us through a very difficult time by very prudently ensuring people got the support for their lives. And as the recovery took hold, as people started to spend, that we started to ramp up expenditure, both in terms of just regular expenditure, but also in terms of high quality capital expenditure. So that ramp up has begun to happen in a very, very substantial way. So all of this has been underway. And so this is where I kind of end my first part. So you understand the context. Again, once in a century crisis, a situation when there is unprecedented global monetary and fiscal stimulus. The government very prudently and with great capability and great insight, applying appropriate stimulus as required. And then, of course, as the economy opens up, really putting the foot on the accelerator and really enabling the economy to get into a V-shaped recovery. So that is the backdrop, that is the picture while all of this was happening. Now, one more important aspect to the backdrop and this whole context that you need to understand is that even as countries around the world were applying monetary and fiscal stimulus, most of what they were trying to do was focused on recovery. Most of it was focused on recovery. What our government did, and brilliantly well, I must say, brilliantly well, is not just focus on recovery, but focus on revival also, right? Which is to ensure that even as we are supporting the economy, providing people the sustenance that they needed, the support that they needed, we started to take major, bold reform steps. And I can give you 4 or 5 of those that were part of the Atmanirbhar Abhiyan package. One being, of course, the labor codes consolidated, 39 laws consolidated into 4 codes. Commercial coal mining was thrown open. So we have, commercial coal mining opening up. Obviously, we had the agriculture, which, of course, as you know, has been a contentious issue. We also, at the same time, opened up defense production. We also decided to introduce these production-linked incentives, which are going to be massively supportive of manufacturing. These were all things that were done through the Atmanirbhar Abhiyan package. So while most countries in the world were really focused only on just helping the economy recover, we were already thinking ahead. We were saying, let's not a crisis go to waste. Let's put in major reform steps as well. And through these major reform steps, let's revive the economy so that we can continue forward on this 7-8% growth trajectory. So that is the background, that is the context to this budget. And now I come to the second part of my talk today, which is to really tell you about the budget itself. Now, as you know, there is a famous saying which says, the moment finds the man. You must have heard that, right? The moment finds the man. In this case, friends, the moment found not the man, the moment found the lady. Of course, the Honorable Finance Minister had said that this was going to be a groundbreaking budget. She has more than fulfilled people's expectations. And the stock market is a very unforgiving barometer. It's a very unforgiving institution in that regard. You set expectations, and if you don't meet expectations, people immediately vote with their money, right? So the expectation had been set that this was going to be an unprecedented budget, that this was going to be a groundbreaking budget, and yet subsequently, and please recognize that it didn't just happen for one day. Subsequently, the stock market has been booming for the last 4 or 5 days, and the markets are up about 10%, I believe, in total since the budget was announced. This is extraordinary because you had already set expectations. Expectations were high, but you surpassed those high expectations, and therefore the moment has found the lady. The moment has found a groundbreaking budget that surpasses expectations. So let me tell you why this budget has surpassed expectations, why this is a groundbreaking budget. I will point out 5 notable features that you should note down. And again, as Professor Shettigar just said, it's been my good fortune for a long period of time to be following the budgets. And of course, Professor Saab knows well that my father had to deal with a very difficult situation in 1990, 1991, when we had a huge balance of payments crisis. And then, of course, we had the reform budget of 1991. Since at least 1990, that's 30 years, folks, 30 years, I have been following the Indian budget with very, very great sort of interest. with very close attention to detail. And I will say that this budget of fiscal 2022 is among the absolute top budgets of the last 30 years. So in a handful of 4 or 5 budgets that really will be remembered in history post-liberalization as being groundbreaking budgets, this absolutely belongs there. Why? So now let's get down to the substance. What are the 5 things about this budget that really enable it to be historic? And let me tell you that when I was in the Ministry of Finance, one of the things that I did before we presented the budgets of 2016, 2017 with then Honorable Finance Minister Shri Arun Jaitley ji, I made it as a scholar and as a student of India's economic history to actually sit down and read all the budget speeches and all of the budget documents from the reform budget of 1991 onwards. So I read through every single one of them. I still have all of them, kind of bound. I studied all of them. Therefore, when I tell you that there are 5 very notable, important aspects of this budget, it's based on this very serious sort of study that I have done of all of these 31 budgets since liberalization. So let me tell you what are the 5 very notable aspects of this budget. The first very notable aspect of this budget is that this budget is going to promote non-inflationary, long-term sustainable growth through capital investments. I've already highlighted that we've gone from 3.35 lakh crores in fiscal 20 to fiscal 22, which is just 2 years later, of spending 5.5 lakh crores, right? This is a growth of almost 60-65% in capital expenditure. And this money is going to go into agricultural infrastructure, it's going to go into roads, it's going to go into ports, it's going to go into airports, it's going to go into railways. Railways alone is going to get 1.1 lakh crores out of this 5.5 lakh crores. So by investing in infrastructure, by investing in productivity of this kind, we are going to dramatically raise India's growth trajectory and India's ability to sustain that growth trajectory, because we are making these extraordinary supply side investments. So that's the first notable feature. And as I said, it's in railways, it's in roads, it's in agriculture infrastructure. And I want to really highlight the agriculture infrastructure part of it, because we've created an agriculture infrastructure development cess of about 1 lakh crores, which is going to go directly from petrol and diesel. The money is going to be taken from the petrol and diesel excise taxes, and it's going to go against agricultural infrastructure. That doesn't mean prices are going to increase for consumers. No, this was excise that was being collected in any case, that is just being earmarked against agriculture. And by the way, we are all beneficiaries of what's happening in national highways and the speed which our national highways are being built out. And that in itself is because of the same kind of earmarking of cesses for national highways, which was done during Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government. Actually, when my father was finance minister, and Khanduri Sahab was, I think, the transport minister, but they earmarked money to go directly to national highways as a cess on petrol and diesel. And this earmarking, the cess which went directly to national highways, enabled the build out of the Golden Quadrilateral and has enabled this incredible build out of our national highways. We are all beneficiaries of that. So in the same way, this Agriculture Infrastructure Development Fund is going to get created. The money is going to be earmarked and it's going to pour into agricultural infrastructure. That includes cold chain, it includes warehousing, it includes logistics support of various kinds. And I think it's going to be transformational for our farmers, transformational for our agriculture. Because please understand, the challenge in agriculture right now is not production. Our farmers are very, very hardworking. They're very, very good at adopting new technologies, and our production is going up. I think our production has gone up from about 235 to 40 million tons of cereals to 295 million tons of cereals. So we're continuously increasing our yield and our productivity. But unless you can process this, unless you can store it correctly, unless you can move it around the country through lower logistics costs and then export it with lower logistics costs, the more production just results in lower prices and lower incomes to farmers. So we had to invest in agricultural infrastructure so that we can increase not just the output, but also the realization for our farmers through processing. And that's what is being done through agricultural infrastructure. So number 1 point is the infrastructure investment. The number 2 point that is happening is obviously health. And in health, of course, there's 35,000 crores that's been set aside for vaccines. That's for 50 crore people, 500 million people. 500 million people are going to get free vaccines as a result of this. And if the states cooperate, maybe all of us can get free vaccines because of what the government has done. This creates confidence. This unlocks animal spirits in the economy. People feel like the coronavirus pandemic is behind us. We don't have to fear the pandemic anymore. Normal activities, particularly high contact activities, resume. People, go to hotels, people go to restaurants, people fly, people get on trains because they feel the pandemic is over. So 35,000 crores for vaccines, building out the healthcare system, and very importantly, about 60,000 crores for the Jal Jeevan mission, which means that 2.86 crore households in urban areas are going to get water. And that, of course, has a huge impact on sanitation, clean drinking water, nutrition, etc., etc. And of course, we are going to be pouring money into wastewater management, into solid waste management, and so on. Our cities are going to be cleaner. Our Swachh Bharat mission is also included in this massive allocation for health. So huge investment in health, huge investment in clean drinking water, huge investment in sewage improvement, air pollution, all of the things that enable us to lead healthier, happier lives. So that's the second very notable aspect of this. We have set the stage for free vaccinations for everyone. Massive, groundbreaking, very historic. Point number 2. Point number 3, incredible strengthening of the financial sector. Now, there are many, many things that have been done. Remember that unless we can finance growth, we can't sustain growth. So it was very important for us to strengthen our financial sector, because our financial sector, domestic savings, domestic financing, domestic intermediation really have to finance growth. So if we don't finance growth, we really can't move forward. And that's what we are doing by strengthening the financial system. I'll quickly check off 3 or 4 items. Happy to take any questions on this. 1, the national monetization pipeline, so that brownfield assets of the government can in fact monetize. An asset recycling loop has been created. We develop greenfield assets, we operate them, we bring them to maturity, and then we monetize them. A whole asset recycling loop, number 1. Number 2, there have been a number of issues that investors have brought up regarding REITs and InvITs. We have cleaned all those up. That's very important because more of these brownfield assets can be put into investment trusts, and they can then be taken public through the capital markets, and more money can flow into infrastructure. So that's another very important step in terms of the REITs and the InvITs. The third thing that we're doing is we have said that we are going to privatize 2 public sector banks. Historic, groundbreaking, the path has been laid down. Now we have to work on that, but we are going to privatize 2 public sector banks. Number 4, we have said that we can increase investment in insurance companies from 49% to 74% with open control. That's also a very important measure to attract more investments, more financing, more intermediation into our financing system. Another very, very important thing that we have done. Obviously, 20,000 crores for further strengthening and recapitalization of our banks. That too has been done. So very important steps as far as the financing system is concerned. So very quickly to just recap, number 1, massive increase in CapEx. Number 2, tremendous boost to healthcare. Number 3, really strengthening our financial system. Number 4, agriculture. Now, again, in agriculture, we have said over and over again that we will put in the infrastructure development and all of that. But this time as well, we have emphasized how much more we are spending on MSP. When we were spending 1 lakh crores in 2013-14 in terms of procurement for farmers, we are increasing that and have increased that to 3 lakh crores. So the MSP system is not just wheat and rice. The MSP system includes cotton, it includes pulses, 22 perishable crops. So our farmers are getting tremendous support and tremendous safety net that the government is creating. The money that we are spending on fertilizer subsidy is going up. The inputs to farmers are being improved. Of course, we are rolling out rural infrastructure in a very, very dramatic way, as I've already highlighted. So tremendous support for our agriculture sector. And finally, the fifth thing that we're doing is the support of manufacturing through the production-linked incentives. About 1.1 lakh crores has been set aside for a number of champion sectors where we are going to increase our mobile production, our production of auto parts, our production of TVs, refrigerators, textiles. Textiles, of course, are getting the support of the 7 mega textile parks as well. So tremendous support for our manufacturing sector. So these are again, as I said, number one, infrastructure, number two, healthcare, number three, agriculture, number four, financing, and number five, manufacturing. In each of these areas, massive, unprecedented steps have been taken to really boost our growth. Now, I'll conclude my discussion of the five notable features of the budget by highlighting two things as we step back. One, the government has taken unprecedented steps towards more transparency in the budget by including the Food Corporation of India subsidies above the line and being very, very explicit about it. Similarly, for the fertilizer subsidy and cleaning up the loans that we've taken from the National Small Savings Scheme, we have shown incredible transparency. We've said that the fiscal deficit is going to be 9.5% this year, 6.8% the next year, and we are on a glide path down to 4.8% by fiscal 26. So we've shown tremendous transparency. We've shown absolute clarity on what the fiscal pathway is, and we have really made all that abundantly clear. And then the final aspect, as we step back from the budget, is again, I will highlight the macroeconomic stability that India represents, the very close cooperation between the fiscal authorities and the monetary authorities, with RBI taking the appropriate actions, both in terms of the reverse repo, the repo, as well as the Operation Twist that they're engaging in, and the fiscal stimulus that's coming at the right time from the government as well. So tremendous focus on macroeconomic stability, tremendous focus on transparency, close coordination between our economic authorities. All of this creates tremendous confidence. Sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas. So it creates tremendous transparency and confidence in the way in which the government is managing this once-in-a-century crisis. And that's what markets are responding to. That's the unlocking of the animal spirits that is happening. So that is the picture of the budget. That's how the budget, I think, has been truly groundbreaking. Now, let's come to the 3 or 4 things we need to pay attention to as the year goes on. Number one, we have to pay attention to the asset monetization that we are undertaking, because that 1.75 lakh crores is an important element of the funding of the capital expenditure of 5.5 lakh crores. So we have to pay attention to that. That includes obviously the listing of LIC. It includes the sale of BPCL, the sale of Container Corporation of India, the sale of Air India, plus whatever we are going to do with respect to the National Highways Authority of India and Power Grid Corporation in terms of InvITs and brownfield monetization of assets. So how are we going to do with respect to our disinvestment proceeds, both in terms of listing, strategic sales, as well as in terms of asset monetization? All of these are important, number one. Number two, there is a lot of legislative work that needs to happen to enable much of this. We have to pass amendments to the Insurance Act to enable 74%. We have to pass amendments to the Banking Act to be able to privatize 2 public sector banks. So how do we manage? We have the cryptocurrency bill coming up. We have the development finance institution coming up. So there's a packed legislative calendar for the finance ministry. Obviously, as the chairman of the Standing Committee on Finance, that is of great interest to me and to our committee. So the legislative work that we have to do is very important. And I hope, Parliament functions well so we can do the business of the people and we can get all of this work done. So that's second. The third thing that I think is going to be very important is to watch private sector investment. So for my young friends, the one metric that I would say that they should really, really closely watch is what is happening to FDI and capital formation in the economy. So FDI information comes pretty often, once a month. Capital formation in the economy happens once a quarter when so the numbers are announced by the CSO. So please watch that. And then obviously watch on a day-to-day basis FPI, which is foreign portfolio inflows, because we need private sector investment, because private sector investment is what drives growth, it drives jobs, and all of this is going to really be shown by the kind of investment that we're getting in. So these are the 3 aspects we've really got to watch out for. Of course, the disinvestment proceeds, the legislative actions that are necessary, and then how the private sector responds through investments. These are the 3 things we've got to watch out for. and those are going to be very important. I'll conclude now. I know I've taken about 30, 40 minutes, so a little bit longer than I anticipated. But I'll conclude now, friends, by just talking about jobs. Because for all of you as young people, what you will want to know is, what's my future going to look like? Am I going to find good, high quality jobs so that my career takes off, my life gets off to a great start, and I can achieve prosperity for myself and for my family? And friends, this is almost the best possible budget for jobs. And the reason is twofold. One, animal spirits are going to get unleashed. As I said, if expectations were here, this is what we've delivered on. And when you unleash animal spirits, people have confidence in the future. People invest, they grow their companies, they scale up, and that creates, tremendous job opportunities. And by the way, that's what happened, as Professor Shettigard remembers very well, in 2001, 2002, where, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government undertook a series of very bold and important reform steps, and that led to a tremendously durable growth spurt that lasted right up to the global financial crisis in 2009. So we had 6 or 7 years of phenomenal growth because of the reform steps that had been undertaken, and that created a lot of jobs. It was a golden period for economic growth and job creation. We are at the brink of something similar, so I think jobs are going to do very, very well because of this unleashing of animal spirits, this unleashing of investment. And second, please understand what has happened, as I said right at the outset, to India's sustainable growth rate. This is not about just 11% this coming fiscal year. It's not about 11%. It's about the long term. Are we going to continue to grow 7, 8% for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? If that happens, you're going to not only get a good job right away, but your career is going to see great sort of growth and great opportunities for you to do well, for you to lead prosperous lives and bring up wonderful families. And of course, we will be doing that in an Atmanirbhar Bharat, a Bharat that is competitive globally, a Bharat that is following a sustainable growth trajectory, bringing down carbon, improving air quality, improving the swachhta of our cities and our rural areas, and of course building a more resilient India. So I always say Atmanirbhar Bharat, A and B, equals CSR, competitive, sustainable, resilient. A and B equals CSR. And if you look at the budget, competitiveness, sustainability, resilience, in all three dimensions, the Honorable Finance Minister has presented a groundbreaking, very, very powerful budget. And I think we have a tremendous decade ahead of us. I have coined it, of course, you may have seen my article in the Times of India and elsewhere, the Roaring 20s. So we are going to see the Roaring 20s coming up, a great budget for the first year of the decade. Now the decade should be the Roaring 20s. Thank you very much, and happy to take whatever questions you all might have.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights. And I'm sure that students must have got some valuable points. Now I would like to call Dr. Monica ma'am to undertake the question and answer round.
Thank you, Aditi. With such an insightful and enlightening session, I'm sure the students will be having a lot of questions. One of the important points of discussion, sir, in the budget has been the disinvestment target of about 1.7 lakh crore. And out of this 1.7 lakh crore, 1 lakh crore coming from the sale of public sector banks and financial institutions. So, sir, my question is, does it not defeat the purpose of nationalization of banks in the first place? What we did way back in 70s and 80s, what will happen to such social objectives if we were to go ahead and privatize or nationalize the banks?
So, Monica ji, first and foremost, the 1.75 lakh crores is the sum total of the disinvestment proceeds. And as I said, the investment proceeds includes three different categories. It includes listing. So the listing of LIC alone, I think, can generate very substantial proceeds. Then there is the strategic sale, and we are doing the strategic sale, which is already in the pipeline of BPCL, Container Corporation of India, Air India. So we have strategic sales. And then third is asset monetization, which is sales of brownfield operating assets, government land, etc., etc. And then, of course, the more routine disinvestments that have always been happening through the Bharat ETFs and all of that. So the 1.75 lakh crores includes all of these different. I'm quite confident that the LIC listing itself, which is well on track, of course, will require an amendment to the LIC Act, will be able to go a very long way towards meeting the 1.75 lakh crores target. Now we come to your second question about bank nationalization. I'm not going to get into an ideological discussion of why. Just excuse me one. So, as I was saying, bank nationalization obviously happened in 1969, right? So that's 50 years ago, and since then, obviously the economy has been transformed, the financial sector has been transformed, and we have been able to dramatically improve financial inclusion through the Jan Dhan scheme, through the Mudra scheme, and of course, the financing that we are providing, not just through banks but through NBFCs and so on. To MSMEs, self-help groups, etc., etc. So we are now in a situation where it's important for banks to be able to intermediate effectively, to be able to provide financing effectively, and for that we think it's a good idea, now that the banks have been consolidated to some extent, for us to privatize two public sector banks so that they can be even more competitive and even more robust and stronger going forward.
Thank you so much, sir. In fact, I really like the term which you coined, booster rocket, for the present budget. It's quite interesting. So we have a lot of questions coming up. So the first question which we are going to take up is from one of our students, Arnav Mahajan of PGDM. Arnav, you can ask the question. Arnav, you need to unmute yourself. Arnav, you need to unmute yourself. You're not audible.
I guess, ma'am, there is some issue. In the meanwhile, we can take the next question, I guess.
Okay. So the next question is from Sabya Bajaj. Yes, Sabya. You have to unmute yourself. I guess there's some problem. Sabya, you are not audible. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, ma'am. So good afternoon, sir. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be able to speak to you. So my question was, so we have seen an inconsistent recovery. Some sectors are reaping the results of the pre-COVID era, whereas others are still struggling. Could you please enumerate the fact that what is in it in the forthcoming budgets for these sectors, so that they can also, so that they get a recluse and they're able to majorly bounce back? And I majorly talk about the informal sector or the unorganized or the disorganized sector. Thank you, sir.
So, Sabya, as you know, the best relief that we can provide is free vaccines for everyone. Because the moment everybody is vaccinated and we reach herd immunity, we can go back to leading our normal lives and everything goes back to the pre-COVID. As I said, is what the Honorable Finance Minister has done through the allocation that she's made for the vaccines of 35,000 crores. Our outstanding private sector, of course, has ramped up its production capacity. And you should know that while the vaccine is costing 5,000, 10,000 rupees, for the course elsewhere around the world, including in China, in India, each vaccine shot is costing about 500 rupees. I mean, the course, that means two shots. So our private sector, and again, extraordinary entrepreneurial energy, extraordinary business savvy, has been able to produce vaccines so that the treatment costs only 500 rupees or so. Then with the Honorable Finance Minister having set aside 35,000 crores, you can see that this will cover 50 crore people. 50 crore people are going to be covered by the 35,000 crores. Now, if the states also chip in, and you take into account the number of people, some people believe that some 26% of India's population, 30% of India's population already has had COVID. And if we have 50 crores covered by the central government and 50 crores covered by the state governments, we could be in a situation where virtually everybody has immunity for COVID and they can go back to leading their normal lives. If they go back to leading their normal lives, then, whether it's the formal sector or the informal sector, everything goes back to normal as well. But at the same time, to get through this disruption that has happened, the government obviously has provided all kinds of financing support. Obviously, we provided cash in people's bank accounts, the food grain support, all of which I told you about. So we've gotten through the disruption, and now we are going back to normalcy. So that's how we are helping everybody. Sabka saath, sabka vikas. So nobody's being left out.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Arnav, you can ask your question.
Good afternoon, sir. Sorry for the mic. It was not working for some reason. Sir, I wanted to ask about the fiscal deficit that we talked about, which was around 6.8% and is expected to be around 4.5% by 2026. So, sir, don't you think that this will have a further impact on devaluing the rupee, and what are the measures that can be adopted to reduce this devaluation?
So Arnav, are you worried about that?
Arnav, you are not audible. You need to unmute. Arnav,
unmute yourself.
I guess there's some problem with his mic. So, sir, I think...
No worries. So clearly, I think Arnav is clearly worried about it, as many people are worried about the fact that, while we've been spending 3.5% per year, suddenly we are spending 9.5% this year as a fiscal deficit and 6.8% next year. I mean, is that going to lead to high inflation? Is the rupee going to crash? What's going to happen to India's debt dynamics in the future? Those are all very, very good concerns, very good considerations. Let me tell you why that is not so important in this context. First of all, you have to understand that the rupee is a currency that is valued on a relative basis. So everybody around the world is incurring these very large fiscal deficits and running massive monetary stimulus packages, right? So the rupee is a matter of relative valuation. And relatively, actually, we are being more prudent than many other countries. And the best indicator of that is the value of the rupee the last week or so. Since the budget was announced, and the rupee has been very stable. It's been very stable because it's all about relative valuation, right? It may historically, if you take the point of comparison historically and say 9.5 is much higher than 3.5, therefore the rupee should be weak. However, that's not the point of comparison. The rupee is not valued on a historical basis. The rupee is valued on a relative basis, and relative to other countries, we are actually more prudent, and that's why the rupee, and that's why I talked about macroeconomic stability. And that's why the rupee is not being affected by all of this. The other thing, of course, remember is that you run in a counter-cyclical fiscal policy environment. You run large deficits when there is a large output gap. And there is a large output gap in the economy. The economy has just contracted between 7 and 8%. We should have grown 7%. So the output gap is maybe 14 or 15% real. That's how big the output gap is right now. And when the output gap is that big and you pump stimulus, both fiscal and monetary, you're closing the output gap. And because there's enough slack in the economy, there is no risk of inflation. There's very limited risk of inflation. Maybe there's spot inflation in a few commodities or in a few goods here and there. But fundamentally, there's a 15% output gap in the economy, which you're now closing. And that's why, you are actually going to have non-inflationary growth going forward. That's very, very important to understand, Arnav. And the third thing I will say is that if you want to understand debt dynamics. Yes, we are running a fiscal deficit of 9.5% and 6.8%. We are going from debt to GDP of 70% to 83, 84%, right? Because we have to close this output gap, we have to spend more. The question then becomes, is 80, 85% debt to GDP a good number, or do we need to bring it down? Well, most people will tell you that it is very important to bring the debt to GDP down to 60, 70%. That's what the Finance Commissioner said, and I agree with that target. However, remember, this 85% is of debt to GDP is affected both by the amount of debt you have, which is the numerator, and the GDP, which is the denominator. Okay, so if we have to bring debt to GDP down, we can either bring debt down, which of course is going to be difficult when you're running deficits, or you can bring GDP up. And by providing this massive long-term growth boost, you're going to bring GDP up in a big way. GDP will continue to go up. And as GDP continues to go up, debt to GDP will continue to go down. In fact, if we had not done this counter-cyclical fiscal stimulus, if we had not put this kind of money into the economy and done the deficit spending, GDP instead of going up would have contracted. The denominator would have contracted and debt to GDP would have gone up. So you had to spend more. And that's why the debt dynamics are also going to move in a positive way. If in fact you spend more, you know, bizarre it may seem, it is actually correct. You have to spend your way out of this situation. And that's exactly what the Honorable Finance Minister has done. And as I said, the moment has found the lady.
Probably the supply side investment will also help to contain inflationary pressure.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so next question I'll be taking up from Pratik. He's got a very interesting perspective. Pratik Jha.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for coming here. And so my question for you is, don't you think that government of India's government of India's promoting Atmanirbhar Bharat will hamper will hamper our relations with other countries as well, since US has been very vocal about unfair treatment for their goods by Indian government. So, sir, what do you think is the way out?
Pratik, it seems to me that you're misunderstanding Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar Bharat doesn't mean that India will not be open, that India will not be part of global trade and global supply chains. What Atmanirbhar Bharat means is, as I said, A and B equals CSR. What it really means is that we are in control of our destiny. That's what Atmanirbhar Bharat means. We are going to be competitive. We have to invest in India, which is what the budget has done. We have to reform India so that we are strong and self-reliant. And as you know, the Honorable Finance Minister and the CEA have spoken about the Indian cricket team in Australia. That's Atmanirbharta. So we go out, smart young people like you, Pratik, go out. We compete with the best in the world, with the fearsome Australian pace battery, and we beat them. That's Atmanirbharta. And we don't just do it in India. We go to Australia and we beat them in the Gabba, where, India has never won a test match. And the last time Australia lost a test match was 40 years ago in the Gabba. So we beat them in the Gabba. That's what Atmanirbharta means. So we can take on anybody, anywhere and win. That's Atmanirbharta, control of our destiny. So all the steps the government is taking is so that you all can win in the future. You all can be competitive, and you can take on the Australians, the Germans, the Chinese, the Americans, everyone. So it's to enable you to be like the Indian cricket team.
I guess his doubts are cleared, Pratik. So now the next question will be taken by Akash. Akash Agrawal. Akash, are you there? Okay, till then probably we can take Ekansh Gupta's question. Ekansh, are you there?
Akash is there. Akash, do you want to just unmute yourself?
Akash is also there.
Yeah, Akash,
yeah.
Just unmute yourself, son.
Akash, you need to unmute. Probably, I think, Ekansh, you can go ahead with your question.
Now I'm audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, Akash, yeah, you can continue. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is related to bad bank. As the concept of bad bank has been proposed, so really it is a worthy concept or it is a merely of clearing of the balance sheet? And if it turned into the bad idea, then government will come up with another bad bank to manage its consequences.
See, Akash, I want to clarify something. Everybody talks about quote unquote a bad bank, but bank का मतलब क्या होता है? Bank का मतलब होता है deposit taking. That is a bank. In a bank, savers can go to the bank, they can open a checking account or a savings account, they can deposit their money, and with that money, the bank can then give loans. That's what a bank is. The Honorable Finance Minister has not announced a bad bank. A bank is a deposit-taking institution. She's not announced a bad bank. She has announced an ARC, an asset reconstruction company. So basically what will happen is that under RBI guidelines, existing banks, both public sector and private sector banks, will take their NPAs using these RBI guidelines. They will then mark those loans appropriately. They will then transfer them to the ARC, and the ARC will have special competence, special ability to be able to handle these assets, either take them through restructuring or through liquidation through the NCLT process, sell them to other ARCs, other AIFs, but to have the competence and the ability and the balance sheet to be able to deal with these NPAs. And by freeing our existing banks of the NPAs, they can go off and do fresh lending. Right now, so many of our banks are so tied up with NPAs that they can't do fresh lending. So what we need to do is we need to take the NPAs away from them, mark it on their books appropriately, but get rid of that once and for all, give it to this consolidated ARC, and let the consolidated ARC deal with the NPAs. Not have every single bank dealing with the NPAs, because that becomes, from a decision-making point of view, a very difficult task. Here we consolidate decision-making, we consolidate competence, and it's all there transparently. That's the idea of this ARC. It's not a bank, it's an ARC. I want to make that very clear.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure, Akash, it's all clear now. So next question will take up from Ekansh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for joining us. So my question is, what are your thoughts on agriculture infrastructure and development cess that has been imposed recently in the budget? And do you think other department taxes are similarly added for better planning and utilization of funds?
So Ekansh, you obviously asked the question. I've spoken already at length about the Agriculture Infrastructure Development Fund and the cess. What are you specifically worried about in this? What concerns you about it?
Yeah, Ekansh, you need to unmute and give the answer. Ekansh, unmute. Yeah. Now you're...
So the thing which I was thinking, that agriculture cess is implied on food products like common basic products like apple, cashews. And so my question revolved on that thought that these are very basic products for a simple common man. So if these get expensive, is it going to affect in a bad way to the common man?
So Ekansh, I'll answer on multiple levels. First of all, आम जनता जो है वो लगभग सेब नहीं खाती है, काजू तो लगभग खाती ही नहीं है, और अगर खाती है तो कभी कभार ही खाते हैं, ठीक है ना? तो इसलिए ऐसा नहीं है कि आम जनता को सेब और काजू से कोई खास प्रभाव पड़ता है. दूसरी बात मैं समझाऊंगा, अगर आपने बजट में उसको देखा होगा कि वो जहां सेब और काजू की बात की गई है, तो ऐसा नहीं कहा गया है कि सेब और काजू में जो आप जाके खरीद रहे हैं तो उसका भाव बढ़ेगा. सिर्फ ये कहा गया है कि अगर आप सेब न्यूजीलैंड से आप ला रहे हैं, आप सेब अमेरिका से ला रहे हैं, आप काजू जो हमारे देश में जिसका बहुत उत्पादन होता है, आपको तो मालूम ही है कि गोवा, केरला वगैरह में काजू का कितना उत्पादन होता है, तो आप अगर घरेलू काजू का उपयोग करेंगे तो वो इम्पोर्ट ड्यूटी उस पर नहीं लगेगी. और अगर जो इम्पोर्ट ड्यूटी सेब पे लग रही है, काजू पे लग रही है, वो इसलिए लग रही है जिसमें कि आप घरेलू उत्पादन जो है उसको आप ज्यादा उपयोग करें और आप ज्यादा इम्पोर्ट न करें. अधिकतर जो ये एग्रीकल्चर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट है, अधिकतर इसके जो सेस होंगे, जहां से पैसा आएगा वो पेट्रोल और डीजल से आएगा. सेब और काजू से तो बहुत कम ही मात्रा में आएगा, और इसलिए ही आएगा क्योंकि हम लोग घरेलू उत्पादन को हम लोग प्रोत्साहन देना चाहते हैं। तो ये मैं आपको जो भी आपकी इस विषय पे शंका हो, मैं उनमें से दूर करना चाहूंगा।
Thank you, sir. A lot of faculty members and doctoral scholars also are having a lot of questions. So the first question from faculty side, Dr. Manoj Pandey, he has a very interesting question. Pandey, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Well, we appreciate the introduction of Ayushman Bharat scheme for the poor people. But how do you justify imposing of 18% GST on a basic health insurance policy, which we middle class people and even lower middle class people are supposed to buy for their health care? And the second question is, you talked about the crucial activity and legislative changes. Looking at the political situation, sir, how are you confident about getting all these things from the parliament? Thank you very much, sir.
Insurance, as you know, Manojji, does have GST applied to it, and there are many representations that some of the most basic insurance policies should not have GST. I'm sure the Honorable Finance Minister will see those representations, and on health, if there is a requirement, I'm sure she will consider it. So let us see. There are many representations that have come as far as health insurance is concerned. Now, coming to the legislative calendar, there are various ways like, applying kind of a guillotine, as it's called, to pass certain bills. Obviously, we don't want that. We would certainly very much value and participate, as I have many times, a robust debate in Parliament about all of these legislative actions. And I think that's what the people of India deserve. We need to do the business of the people of India. That's what we're to Parliament for. And again, as I said, I, for one, relish that debate, because then it gives us an opportunity to explain to everyone exactly what the thinking behind some of these initiatives is. But we have to have our friends in the opposition also cooperate and recognize that the temple of democracy should not be treated in this manner. We have to all be respectful of the traditions of parliamentary democracy, of the norms and protocols that Parliament has evolved over the last 70 years or so. So I will, of course, plead with my friends in Parliament that they allow us to take forward these legislative actions, and we all would welcome and appreciate a good, robust debate on these issues. If there is no robust debate, then I believe that it's because they don't want a debate, and that's why they will block and make things difficult. So I'm hopeful that that won't happen. If it does happen, we will still find ways to do the people's business.
Totally agree with you on this, sir. So now we have a very interesting question from our doctoral scholar, Dayatri. Dayatri, you can ask the question.
Thank you, sir, for addressing us today. This is, I always was very passionate about how you followed the budget speeches, but just an interesting take that we have been doing sensitivity analysis of the speeches for the past 3 years. And I'd just like to share that youth has been one of the words which has had very positive sentiment in the previous as well as this year's speech. So to start with that, I have 3 questions. First one being the third point that you covered about disinvestment, and you mentioned that disinvestment in LIC is having very high hopes as of now. But given the present market volatility, you think this is rightly timed, or will it be in sync, or will we lose out on having the disinvestment as of now? My second question is, this is post-pandemic, and yet one of the recommendations of the 15th Finance Commission is that we want to rationalize and reduce the centrally sponsored scheme. So how is the government trying to do that? Is it over a period of time, or how is it being timed? And my last question is, there's a lot of buzz about decriminalizing limited liability partnerships. And we also saw that there's a focus on a one-person company. So the finance minister also said that LLPs will be allowed to raise debt securities. will this actually jeopardize our business environment? Because how we have seen in the past few years, the scams and everything else. So that's from my side, sir. Would be interesting to hear from you.
Thank you, Gayatri, for your 3 questions. And I will ask Monica ji to take one final question, and then I will sign off. But let me answer your 3 questions, Gayatri ji. First, you asked about the LIC listing. This is a very good time for the listing because obviously markets are at record highs, and we are continuing to see robust inflows both from domestic and foreign investors. So this is a very good time to list LIC. And I think we'll get very healthy proceeds from that. So that's question number 1. Question number 2 you asked was regarding the expenditures and the rationalization of central schemes. There, the Expenditure Secretary, Shri Somnathan, has already said that the rationalization of central schemes is a dynamic, ongoing process. And those schemes that have outlived their life will be pruned. Those that are new and impactful will be continued. And so it's a dynamic, continuous process of looking through the central schemes. And then your final question was regarding financing and decriminalization of smaller businesses, one-person corporations, and so on. Obviously, there's, again, ongoing work that is done through the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. If you have any particular recommendations, you're welcome to send it to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and copy the Standing Committee on Finance, because we obviously discuss all of that with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. And if there are any good suggestions, we will certainly take those up. So you're welcome to do that, Gayatri. Monica ji, the last question.
Yes, sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for offering her suggestion to take to the Finance Commission and all that. So last question we'll take up from Aditi Garg. Aditi, a quick one question.
Can you hear me,
Aditi?
ma'am?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good afternoon, sir. Honored to meet you. Sir, from what we observed, essential commonly used items like refrigerators, mobile phones, LEDs, they are going to become more expensive because of the hike in customs duty. So, sir, is it that the idea is to encourage Indians to consume more Indian goods? And if yes, then what is the backup plan to produce these in India? Are we technologically ready enough to compete and produce these goods at such a massive scale within the country?
The answer is yes, Aditi. And as you can see, we are already exporting many high-value consumer durables, whether it's cars, motorcycles, refrigerators, air conditioners, mobile phones. All of that is already happening. And it's very important for India to continue to build up that production capacity so that not only can we meet the needs of our vast domestic market, but we can also act as a production hub and an export hub for the rest of the world. So when you look at the import duties that have been increased, you also have to take into account what's being done with production-linked incentives for those very same goods so that people can make them here in India, and what we're doing with respect to capital expenditure, logistics, etc., so that the cost of production also can be super competitive. So on the one hand, we are in fact raising duties a little bit, but on the other hand, we're also encouraging domestic production through all of these means so that India can become a more competitive global hub for the manufacture of these consumer durables. And we are absolutely doing that. There was a time not so long ago, 5 years ago, where India produced 0 smartphones, literally 0 smartphones. Today, we are producing 330 million smartphones a year, and we are exporting smartphones from India. So this is entirely doable. It's entirely feasible. And that's what these policies are intended to do.
Thank you so much, sir. It has been a pleasure, for you to hear clearing all the doubts from the students. Now, I'll request Director Dr. Harivansh Chaturvedi to say a few words. Sir.
Thank you, respected Sri Jayant Sinha ji. It's a great pleasure to have you amidst our students and faculty. I thank Dr. Jagdish Shettigar for giving this big opportunity to our institute. And I was listening for last half an hour. I was attending another major event, but I left in in between and joined your talk, and the way you have interacted with our student, it was fabulous. And our students are the big gainer today because they could get a holistic view of the economy. And although they have been taught by professors like Settigarji, Dr. Pooja Misra Monikaji, but I think the way you have dealt with their confusions and their queries, it was really wonderful. And I know that our students, they should look into your profile. I found that every big thing, best thing you have done in life, you are an icon for our young generation. The way you have studied and you have got distinction everywhere, not only from at IIT, Delhi and Harvard, everywhere you have made distinction. And currently you are presiding Indian Parliament's one of the most strong parliamentary committee, which is looking into the finance, banking, Reserve Bank of India, everything related to finance. So we are really grateful, and we are connected not only with you but your whole family. We had the privilege in past to host your respected father, Sri Sinhaji, Yashwant Sinhaji, for delivering a convocation address in 2013. Your brother has also addressed one of the retail conference. So I think we have some connection with your family, and also the legacy left by your forefathers in the Ranchi and Bihar. You are well known everywhere, and you are doing so good for Hazaribagh. Thank you, Sri Jainji.
Thank you very much, Professor Chaturvedi. And once again, thank you to you and to Professor Shettigar for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to all my young friends for asking such excellent probing questions. It helps me also to be able to answer those questions because it helps me clarify my own thinking. So thank you all for this opportunity, and I look forward to future interactions. Jai Hind.
Thank you.
So Aditi, over to you, just a few minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for clearing the doubts of the students. Now I would like to request Dr. Pooja Misra ma'am to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Aditi. Sir, I'll just take 2 minutes. It's my privilege and honor to thank you, sir, Member of Parliament, Chairperson, Parliamentary Standing Committee for Finance, for the insight that you provided to our students for this year's budget. I must thank you, sir, for sparing your valuable time and enlightening our students in the budget, helping them decode the budget. Like you mentioned, sir, as far as the budget is concerned, within the current global and Indian economic context, the effort in the budget has been to ensure that growth trajectory is maintained in the 7 to 8% in the long term. With growth plummeting, absolute contraction is what the nation has been confronted with. However, as you mentioned, the government has taken powerful and bold decisions in this scenario. India's first priority, like you mentioned, and was to protect lives. And luckily and thankfully, we are going through a V-shaped recovery. Government has chosen a prudent path and started spending when the economy opened up. Indian government has focused on recovery and revival. With the budget announcement, interestingly, the stock market has been booming, not only on 1st of February, but for the past 4-5 days. And it's been a groundbreaking budget. Just 5 things that you mentioned, and I would like to reinforce with the students, the 5 reasons which makes the budget historic. First being, it has promoted non-inflationary long-term growth through capital investment in agriculture and infrastructure, health expenditure, which has created confidence amongst all of us, strengthening of the financial sector, where asset monetization, privatization of 2 PSU banks, 1 insurance company, agriculture, and obviously that is one of our key sectors. What was good was that the emphasis was also put on the MSP system that the government is fully focusing on. The support to manufacturing through production-linked incentive schemes, and not to miss the fact that the government has shown tremendous transparency in this year's budget. Last but not the least, like you mentioned, sir, a few things that need to be watched out for. First being that the government needs to pay attention to the implementation of the National Asset Monetization and Disinvestment Program. A lot of legislative work which needs to be done behind the scenes. And importantly, watch out for private sector. I'm sure the students are all very happy when they became very happy when they heard that this budget should be able to generate a whole lot of jobs. So you made the students' day, sir, for sure. And I like the line that you mentioned, roaring 20s coming up. Thank you once again, sir. I'd just like to step in and thank Dr. Chaturvedi, Dr. Anupam Verma, Dr. Arora, and all my esteemed faculty colleagues. I must also thank the economics area faculty for helping us coordinate this session. Dr. Shettigar, Monica, Khanendra, and Dr. Amrendra Pandey. Also, not to mention, there's a lot of work that was done behind the scenes by the economics committee, which is the Eco Chamber over here. So thank you, Eco Chamber students. Thank you all once again. Thank you, sir. So I guess we've come to the end of the session, right? Thank you, everybody. So we log out? Yeah.
Thank you, Shettigar ji. Thank you, Pooja ji, Monica ji. Everybody has done very well. And very, very good participation of students. I think a lot of work has been done before the event.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes.
इसका बिजनेस लाइन में भेजना है रिपोर्ट जरा
जी
बिजनेस में इसका रिपोर्ट आज शाम को 4 बजे तक भेज दीजिए तो कल छप जाएगा संडे को निकलता है
जी सर हाँ जी
हेडिंग सेट्टिगार जी से पूछ लीजिए हेडिंग
जी जी सर हाँ जी ओके
आपको हेडिंग उनके जयंत जी के नाम से जाएगी तो
उन्हीं का नाम पे हाँ
थैंक्स